Hey there, Metalheads, Flying V here, and today I'm going to show you guys how to disassemble and reassemble a Nintendo GameCube. This should apply to every GameCube. If you have any manufacturer differences, let's say it doesn't have one of the serial ports, or it doesn't have the place to plug in a component cable, it should still be the same. So, I'm not going to go super in depth. I'm just going to show you guys how to just take apart all of the big pieces. So, without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that you need is that you need a 4.5mm game bit. You can't find these in a hardware store. You have to buy these online. You can find these on old video game websites, basically, stuff like DK Oldies, websites like those that sell old video game consoles or parts. You can probably also find these on Amazon, though I haven't looked, but you can definitely find them on eBay. So once you get these, you can then get started. So first thing you want to do is you want to flip the console over, make sure nothing's plugged in, make sure everything is removed when you disassemble your console. There are 4 screws along the corners. So basically just take your screwdriver and where'd it go? Just take your screwdriver and remove those 4 screws. So once all the screws are removed, you can then simply lift the lid up, and you can then put this to the side. If you want, you can disassemble this if you want to. Basically, it's pretty simple. Just take a small Phillips head screwdriver, size number 1, and you can remove all these pieces if you want. It's kind of unnecessary, but you can do that if you want. And if you want to remove the jewel, you can simply just pinch on these tabs here, and there is the jewel. Put it back in, you simply stick it back in there like that. So, okay, so the first thing you can do is that you can flip the console to the back, and you can remove this piece. It's basically attached here by these little things onto these. So that's pretty simple. Next, you can remove the controller ports. So same as this piece, simply just remove those. And there's a ribbon cable right here you need to remove. Let me just zoom in here. Please excuse me for a second. Just had to focus the camera, but then you can basically just wiggle the cable back and forth, and I know it's kind of hard to see, but there we go. Now just bear in mind, you don't have to do it so soon. You can do it after you've disassembled the console a little bit more, but that's just when I like to do it. So let's move on. If you'd like, you can remove these 2 screws with the same number 1 size Phillips head screwdriver, and you can remove this piece. So if this piece is dirty, or if you want to replace the clock battery, mine doesn't have one because I removed mine and never replaced it, but that's something else you can do. You don't have to do it, but if there's anything you want to do to this area of the console, you can do that. So again, let's move on. Okay, so the next thing you can do is remove these 2 little metal pieces, and they're both held in by 2 screws each. So you can take a fine Phillips head screwdriver and remove those 4 screws. So once the screws are removed, you can simply just remove them like that, or if you left on the screws, and you can just do it like that. So just put this to the side, and we can continue. Bear in mind that these screws can be stripped very easily, so make sure that you're using the right screwdriver and you're not pushing on these too hard. So once again, there are more screws we have to remove. There are a bunch around the sides here that you have to remove. There's two that keep the fan and the power button assembly screwed in. They're held in by these two screws, and there's also an additional 3 screws underneath them. There's 4 in the back, there's 3 here, and there's 1 hidden underneath this thing. And then on this side, there's 5. So, we'll start with these ones. Take your number 1 size Phillips head screwdriver and remove those screws. Next, you can remove these 2 screws. Once you've removed the 2 screws, you can then simply just, you can fill it around a little bit, and then you can ultimately just put it like that. And then remove the screw, and then remove the 3 screws underneath it. Then you can remove the 4 screws in the back. Okay, so now all the screws have been removed around the sides. Just bear in mind that they are all this length. Okay, so they're all the same size, so you don't have to worry about mixing them up. I recommend sorting all of the screws into little piles like this. These are all the screws we just removed. These are the 4 screws that we're holding in these little pieces, and these are the 4 game bit screws that hold the lid in place. So I recommend that you do something like this so you don't mess yourself up. So anyways, once you've removed all the screws around on the sides, you can then remove the laser and disc spindle assembly. It's actually screwed into this metal shielding part right here, and it's connected by a port on the motherboard. So simply just fiddle with it a little bit, and then there you go. It's off, revealing the motherboard. If for some reason your GameCube won't read games and you need to get to the laser, you have to remove the laser and disc spindle assembly from the metal shielding, and like I said before, it's held in by a bunch of screws. There's a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So take a fun Phillips head screwdriver and remove those screws. So once all the screws are out, you can simply lift the, hang on, it's actually in here a little bit. There we go. You can then remove this from this, and if it's dirty, you should definitely clean this. So, let's move on. Next, you have to remove the screws that hold the board into the plastic casing. So there are 6 screws around here. And basically, again, take your fine Phillips head screwdriver and remove all the screws. I recommend that your screwdriver is magnetized before doing this, because then it's going to be a pain in the neck to stick the screws back in there. So once all the screws are removed, you can then fiddle this thing around and remove it. So the way it's held in here is kind of stupid, but let's try to get it out of there. There we go. So you can then stick this over here, and then there are an additional 2 screws. I believe they're technically, even though mine only has 2, they're technically a total of 3 screws holding this part of the metal shielding into the plastic casing. So again, take your number 1 size Phillips head screwdriver and remove them. So once the screws are out, you can simply just lift it off like that and put it to the side. And then there are an additional 4 screws holding in this little board into the casing. So again, take your fine Phillips head screwdriver and remove those screws. So once the 4 screws are out, you can simply just lift it to the, hang on, get this, there we go. Simply lift it up like that and put it to the side. And if you'd like, you can remove these little pieces of metal if you want, but Depends on what you're trying to do. You can also remove these little metal screw holding things as well, but it's kind of unnecessary, as I said before. So GameCube is basically disassembled. So that being said, let's put it back together. Okay, so before you put it back together, I recommend, if there's anything wrong with your console, I recommend addressing it, or like, replacing any parts like a laser or anything like that. If you want to make any modifications to your console, I recommend doing it while it's apart, or you just want to clean it. Make sure that none of the electronic parts make contact with water, or else you will fry the thing. So, without further ado, let's begin putting it back together. So the first thing you can do is you can simply stick back in the fan board. Let me do it here. Hang on again, give me a second. Okay, there we go. Just make sure you tuck this cable here back in this little slot. So then take your 4 screws, which are this length, and put them back in. Next, you can take the metal shielding and make sure that the hole in the corner is in the upper left-hand corner, and then you can simply stick it back down like that, and then take your 3 screws that are this length, in my case 2, and put those screws back in. Next, you can take the motherboard and stick it back in there. Bear in mind that there is a little connector here that connects right there. So simply stick it down there like that, and then put the 6 screws back in. Next thing you can do is that you can take the controller ports and simply stick them back in there like that. There we go. You can you can simply stick it back on. Actually, no, wait. Just leave it like this for now until we get to a certain point. Then once you get to a certain point reassembling this thing, then you can stick it back on there. So let's move on. Okay, so the next thing you can do is that you can take your metal shielding and your laser assembly. You basically, as you see here, these are where the 2 little metal pieces go on, right here. So basically, this is on the front here, and the when the ribbon cable faces you, that means that this is the front of the thing. So you basically realign the thing with the holes. It may take you a little bit of time, but you should eventually get it. Oh, sorry. There we go. Then you go to the bottom and you put the 6 screws that are this size back in. Alright, so once this is back together, you can simply then just plop it on the top like that. Next thing you can do is you can take the little metal pieces and you apply them like that. Like that. You can put all their respective screws back in. Okay, so once all the screws are back in, you can then simply take your take the controller ports and reattach them to these little things. So last thing you really have to do is put the screws back in on this side, and then we'll talk about this. So with this side, you basically have to put in the 3 screws that go here, and then you basically take the fan and power button assembly piece and simply stick it back on there like that. You basically want to line the holes it has up with the respective screw holes. So once you do that, you can then put the remaining 2 screws back in. The last thing you can do is simply take this piece and stick it back on here. And then, just adjust it here. You can then take your lid and stick it back onto the console. And then you just flip it over, take your game bit screwdriver and put the 4 screws back in. Once the screws are back in, you simply flip the console over and your console has been reassembled. Alright guys, so that does it for this video. I hope you found it helpful. Be sure to leave a like, leave a comment, and subscribe, and share the video. May the force be with you. Mosh hard.